I'd like to welcome my guest today, Anne-Marie Moore. And Anne-Marie's had an amazing career, both in small business and big corporate businesses. So I thought she'd be a very unique guest to have in that she's got so much wisdom to share from both of those areas. And I think there's a lot that we can learn from corporate and apply to small business as well. So welcome, Anne-Marie.
Thanks, Deb.
It's just lovely to have you here.
Thank you.
And can you just explain to our audience what is culture? What's culture all about?
I like to think of culture, Deb, as the norms and the practices in a business. It's the policies, it's the guidelines. In short, I often think of the culture as just the way we do things around here. But I think it's really important to point out, and this is the often tricky or overlooked part of the culture, is that it's actually both the covert and overt behaviours that happen in a business.
Right, yeah.
That shapes the culture, if you like, and then the culture is the environment of that business.
So by covert are the things that we see, like, for example, it might be a corporate culture that everybody tells the truth and everybody's honest with each other. But an overt situation may be that it's not acceptable to take more than 3 chocolate biscuits for morning tea. It's little rules that sort of the culture knows, but are not really what's done in the culture, but it's not widely visible.
That's right. They're not written anywhere. So if you're a new employee, for example, you might come in and be inducted. This is where the bathroom is. This is the way we have our team meetings. But you probably, in all likelihood, won't understand the overt and covert behaviours until you're part of that business, because some of them aren't written anywhere.
Yes, that makes sense. Yeah, exactly. And so why is it important? Why is it important to have a culture in your business?
Deb, I think it's important for a lot of reasons. And firstly, it's important because the culture is the environment that we work in. And I think being human beings, and we can probably all relate to this to some extent, we like to work in a positive environment, an environment where we feel respected, an environment where we feel valued and appreciated. So if you have a culture and your focus is in creating a culture like that, it can really help to propel your business simply because you've got a very positive environment to work in. Conversely, if your culture is not so healthy, then that can have consequences for the people that work in your business. It can have consequences for your brand in terms of your product or your employer brand.
Exactly. So what would you describe the behaviours in a really healthy, positive, vibrant culture? That's sort of a feeling you can feel when you walk in the door. And what are the behaviours that would underpin that sort of a culture?
I think to really create that positive culture and get a sense of positivity in your business, a lot of the behaviours stem from what type of leadership you've got in the business, Deb. So if you've got leadership that's authentic, and by that I mean that it's congruent, that leaders walk the walk and talk the talk, and we hear that, I know it's a cliche, but it's very applicable in this situation because that's the reality, that people are very attuned to the way leaders behave and they'll respond accordingly. So authentic leadership, behaviours like respect, active listening, just I think, leaders having a positive regard for the employee and seeing them as a person and not just looking at them like they're a piece of equipment, like the photocopier or the telephone, to really have a sense of care and regard for them as people.
And that it's genuine, that's what you're saying.
And that's genuine, definitely, that it's genuine, yes. And people will pick up on whether that is genuine or not.
People know, don't they? I've learned along the way that people have inbuilt lie detectors. They know if people are being authentic or not.
Definitely, they can feel it. And, I think of the context of small business. They may not have a lot of resources, but we can all sometimes take the time to stop and just inquire, how was your weekend? How was your child? Are they, if they've been sick or something like that, just to ask or to share some of that personal information that can happen, but in a genuine way for people.
Yeah, that genuine concern.
And I think, those sort of behaviours frame up a business, but then you'll have other behaviours that underpin a healthy culture, like respect, validation, appreciation, saying thank you when a job has been well done. Being able to also have difficult conversations is another area that a lot of people want to shy away from in business. But in a healthy culture, it's actually critical to create harmony in that culture to be able to say what you think, but as long as it's said in a constructive way and to be able to give that feedback and have that two-way conversation, that can be a really healthy behaviour as well.
That's really, really interesting. And something that I think, is can be applied quite easily and directly. And the other thing is, what are the behaviours that would underpin a toxic or a culture that's not so healthy? There's sort of a bad vibe.
The bad vibe culture, and we probably all experience that. I would say the behaviours in that type of culture would be things like competitiveness, and I'm not talking about the kind of environment where salespeople foster that sort of competitive spirit. It's when there's a dog-eat-dog mentality, and I'm prepared to do what it takes to step on my colleagues to get...
Win-lose.
That's right, win-lose. That's a great way of describing it. I think a culture where there is a lack of respect, a lack of regard, there's behaviours like blaming, negativity, things like that, exclusion, where employees will sort of, gang up on somebody else. Even your behaviours like your bullying can be fostered in that culture where it's negative. But again, that comes back to underpinning, that leadership, because often it's the leadership sets the culture, if you like, in the business.
Top
so
down.
Whatever behaviours are happening at that leadership level are flowing down to the people in the business. And as I said before, people are quite attuned, and if you're a leader, you're often someone with a higher profile in the business, so employees will look to you to see what types of behaviours that you have, the way you treat people, the way you talk to people, and if that's done in a negative or destructive way, then those behaviours will foster in the business.
Yeah, that does make sense. Something for us to think about. And what are the traps for small business owners or entrepreneurs when it comes to corporate culture?
I think there's a couple of traps, Deb, in that sort of environment for people with a small business. It might be that somebody has created or established a small business on their own, in their own steam, and they've had a fantastic idea, or they've developed a product that really works. But then they tend to separate from the rest of the business by telling themselves, well, that employee will just have to put up with the way I am. That's the way I am. I like to be direct and blunt with people, and if they don't like it, well, they can leave. So I think there can be often, and I'm not saying this is everybody, but I think that could be a trap, that people feel that it's my business, I'll do what I want. But I think in that environment, as a small business owner, regardless of the fact that it's your business or not, if you want to create that healthy culture, it's good to be on your own case about your own behaviours with people, so that you can really model authentic leadership and create that positive culture for people. I think another trap as well is potentially the thinking that I don't have any resources, therefore I can't create any strategies, I can't undertake any initiatives because I don't have the resources, I don't have enough cash flow to do big and wonderful things for people. But I think here's the point, you don't necessarily need to have a lot of resources behind you to actually create a positive culture for people. They can be small things, they can be little things that actually don't cost any money at all, that we can really instill in our business that can go a long way towards creating that culture. So I think there are probably a couple of traps that people fall into. And with small business, it's challenging because you're often competing against the big businesses for talent. And in a tight labour market, if a big business is offering magnificent benefits and, wonderful attributes to attract employees, small business is still competing with that. They want to attract the best talent for their business. So if they don't have a lot of resources, it's probably extra critical for them to really focus on developing that culture where they can.
Absolutely. And a theme that I've been hearing while listening to you talk is it's all about creating, from the leader to the team, connection, isn't it?
That's
creating
right.
that connection of energy and the flow, and rather than being disconnected, I've created a good idea, now you all have to execute it and get on with your job. It's about having that flow.
That's right, Deb. And if you walk into a business, and we've probably all had this experience where you walk into a business and it's almost like an energy that you can feel the minute you open that front door, and it can be a positive energy or it's sometimes something maybe that you can't articulate, but there's just a vibe in there it just doesn't feel good to be in there. And as much as possible, you can try and establish that positive vibe in your business, and that leads to higher levels of engagement with employees. And engagement really is about passion, it's about enthusiasm, it's about going the extra mile. And we talk about in the corporate world, engagement is linked to discretionary effort. So what discretionary effort is about is willing to go that extra mile.
Right.
How far will you go beyond what you're paid to do to get that product across the line or get that sales meeting happening? And that's often demonstrates how engaged a person is in the business by what level of discretionary effort they will use to get things done.
That really makes sense. It's like the business is engaging them in a genuine way to work with their heart. Like they're passionate about it and they're giving everything to it and creating that high level of service or
That's
product.
right, and they care enough to go the extra mile beyond someone that's disengaged. And we talk about the concept of someone being disengaged. And you could probably all imagine what those behaviours are like, where someone doesn't care, someone's not willing to go the extra mile, watching the clock. As soon as it's 5 o'clock, I'm out of here, I'm not thinking about anything. But also I'd like to point out, there's a danger there. It's great if you've got people that are engaged, that's what we strive for in a business. And then you might have a pool of people that are actively disengaged. But another area of interest or concern, if you like, is to watch out for employees that potentially are passive in your business.
Right.
So they're not engaged, they're not actively disengaged. But when you think about it, imagine the energy of a business where you had 20 people working there that were very passive about the way they did things. I couldn't imagine that energy would have that business would have much enthusiasm or dynamism or passion if people were just passively going about their day-to-day business. So that's another area to be on the lookout for as well, and to observe the behaviours that happen in your business from an employee perspective to understand whether they're engaged or disengaged or passive in your business.
Right, that's a good way to look at things. And from your wealth of experience, I know you've worked at quite a few very large, successful companies. What have you seen that they've done really, really well and have probably made that difference with the engagement that you could share with small business owners?
Sure. I think of one strategy that we did in HR, or we rolled out across the business in conjunction with the senior leadership team. We undertook an organisational survey. And the purpose of that survey was really to get a sense of where employees were with the business, to hear from employees what they thought was working well, what they thought needed to be reviewed or needed to be corrected. But we didn't just take that survey and look at it and think, well, that's all good information, let's pop that in the filing cabinet and not do anything with it. We really took the critical pieces or the engagement drivers from that survey and created then some initiatives on repairing, if you like, some of those areas. So I think of one survey that we did, and something that came out for people was about career development. So people felt that there wasn't many opportunities in the business to develop themselves in their career and develop themselves personally. And I'll point out that that's a pretty critical driver these days for people. People like to be developed, people like to learn and to grow. So it's quite a high expectation, particularly Generation X. They love to come in and be developed. And we took that strategy, we took that feedback, and then we developed some very personalised or customised programs to suit that. So, for example, we looked at development plans, how to write up a development plan, what to put in a development plan, how to have opportunities for development. We looked at career development, how I could better network, what sorts of things I could do to develop my career, how to look at career development, and really provided what the employees needed. And I think of an employee in a business situation, it's almost, to some extent, and I'm not saying, you need to have a line with this, but you almost need to look at the employees as your customers. So how would you service your customers? What are they telling you? What are they needing? And what are you giving back to meet those needs? So that was a very successful strategy. And I think then if you link that back into small businesses who might think, well, we don't have the resources to do a big survey, or we haven't got time to do those sorts of initiatives, I think something very powerful that you could do in a small business is simply to sit down and ask questions of your employees. By going through this process, that will tell you something about the culture, and by that I mean some employees will be very willing to speak up and to be actively engaged in that process. However, depending on the leadership style, it might be that employees are fearful of really saying what they think. So you could either create some sort of cheap survey on SurveyMonkey and ask some questions with anonymous feedback so that you can pool that information. But I think the critical thing is if you're going to undertake an initiative like that, you've got to be prepared to hear and listen to the feedback. The minute you become defensive and start defending what's happening in the business, you'll shut people down.
That's a good point.
But also you need to understand that if you take that feedback, there will be an expectation that people will think that you care enough to do something about what that feedback says. So just be mindful of that, because it's important to manage that expectation. If you're not going to do that, then perhaps that's best communicated at the beginning, that you want to understand what they're thinking, but there might be no action, or you want to understand what they're thinking, and then from that you will create some strategies to help develop areas of the business that need some focus.
That makes sense. It's a good tip. And I think probably a question a lot of small business people's mind is, well, look, my cash flow is really tight, and as you've already touched on, you know, it can be hard to implement some of these bigger initiatives. So what can people do that's very accessible, that they could go out tomorrow and employ in their business? What are some steps they could take that would really make a difference?
It's a good question, actually, Deb, because I know the small business mindset is often like that, and that could be genuinely the reality as well. I think something that small business owners could do would be just to take the time to spend with an employee. So, you know, in the corporate world, we call it the one-on-one, or the one-on-one catch-up, and to really take the time to have that one-on-one catch-up with your employee. You only need to spend 30 minutes on that meeting. But the thing about that meeting, it shouldn't really be an environment to say, Deb, thanks for coming along, here's some more work to do.
Yes,
that's very
right.
task focused. You really want that appointment or that time, that meeting to connect in with you and to ask, how are you going? What are your challenges that you're facing? How can I help you overcome some of those challenges in the business? Because you really want to create that safe environment for an employee to be able to share with you some of their load and have you help them bust through those obstacles that get in the way.
Right.
And the framework of that should be that you're focused on them in that meeting. Don't answer your phone in the middle of it. Don't cancel those meetings unless there's an extraordinary circumstance that takes you out of the business. Really devote that time, and I think you'll find if you do that and you do that effectively, employees really appreciate that you took the time to care, and that therein starts to build that positive relationship. So that's something that small business owners could do. It doesn't cost them anything. It just takes time, and they really have to, you know, if they want to be effective at that, get into the discipline of doing that for people. And people will start to then become more receptive of that process, particularly when it's done regularly, it's done consistently, and it's done with respect. And you'll find then that starts to frame up and shape your culture.
Right, and that's, it's more of a caring kind of philosophy, isn't it?
Yes.
A win-win situation.
Caring and support, because we all need support in our work, and we all come across those situations where we get stuck and there's something getting in the way, whether it's our mindset, whether there's somebody else in the business that's not coming to the party that we need to, you know, break through that relationship or have some more influence to affect an outcome. So there's lots of things that can happen, but it's often just helpful for someone to be able to download that in a safe space. No judgment, no defensiveness, hear what they have to say, give you some ideas and some suggestions to, you know, help bust through that, and we'll go out and get back to work and get on with it.
Yes, so, well, I think that's very valuable and something that people can implement straight away. And how do you know if a workforce is engaged, and what can you do if they're not?
It's a good question, Deb. How do you know if a workforce is engaged? You will see if a workforce is engaged by their productivity, by their positivity, by their passion, by their care. If there's something that's happening in the business, you'll see people really going all out to make sure that whatever obstacles in the way, that they find a way to work through that. They're potentially committed to working longer hours, and I'm not saying that's the answer, but they're committed to doing things beyond what you'd normally expect them to do. If you saw people that were actively disengaged or passive in your business, I think, in all honesty, the best thing to do is sit down and have that constructive conversation with them and just check in with them. And it's not about judging them or blaming them for being engaged, but it's more about seeking to understand what's going on. Deb, I noticed that you're flat when you're walking around the business, or I noticed that you didn't seem to be contributing to our team session. So I'm just wondering, what's happening for you? What's going on for you at the moment?
Right.
And to really see if you can get to the bottom of that. And you'll find some of those conversations, if you're authentic and you have courage to have them, then that can really open up the dialogue and start to really understand in your business what's going on.
So I hear what you've been saying a lot throughout this time today is you're talking about communication is really important, like it's really underpinning a healthy corporate culture, and that might be a good topic that we might explore in another session.
I think it's a great topic, Deb, and it's the
right,
topic that comes up consistently in businesses, small businesses and large businesses. And interestingly, I was reading some research just recently about small business versus big business in terms of the culture and the engagement. And there is no link to the size of a business and its level of engagement. So you can have a small business with high levels of engagement, conversely a large business with lower levels of engagement, because you think, in a larger business, maybe more resources, more people. But there is no link to show that a small business can't create an engaged, healthy culture that's very productive. But I think communication's definitely at the heart of it. And that's the positive communication, that's saying thank you for the small things. That's something that people can do at no cost, and reward and recognition is something that comes up consistently for people. And I think that's because often we forget just to say thank you, that was a job well done. And people appreciate that. They don't necessarily have to have a big, trip overseas or something like that. It's just the small things.
They can be done. And in fact, from my experience in small business, I felt the culture was something that could easily be enhanced because we could be so responsive, think of an idea and do it straight away.
Exactly.
And develop some, a team that are very engaged and love to come to work and very passionate about what they do. So, and just to finish up with today, what are the benefits of having an engaged workforce?
I think the benefits, Deb, are really linked to productivity. And if you look at the research, it shows definitely a higher shareholder return on investment in terms of having an engaged workforce. You have retention, so you are able to retain people in your business, and therefore you have consistency. And with consistency comes a whole different environment than if you've got an environment where people are leaving constantly because you're always scrambling to catch up with the gap that's been left by somebody who's departed your business.
Yeah. It's very expensive.
So it's expensive, and it's often a cost that businesses don't tend to monetize.
No.
Whether that's you have to recruit the business, you've got the backfill, you've got the stress and pressure on other employees that are doing the work that's left by the vacant position. It's also the people that are left behind. It's the training. Yeah. It's when you see somebody leaving the business and you start to question potentially if everyone's leaving, should I think about leaving? So it really has a negative impact. So I think retention is definitely a big factor. Productivity, return on investor sharehold, and just a whole different level of excitement around a business. It's nice to work in it. It's more effective. It's more productive for people, and
more
people
profitable.
More interested and more profit for your business.
Exactly. Well, there's a lot of good reasons to really focus on creating that very strong, energetic, engaged corporate culture. And as we've learnt from Anne-Marie today, it's not that hard. It's just having the focus and taking action to make it happen for your small for your small business, and then to reap the benefits from that. So thank you, Anne-Marie. You've been such a wonderful guest today, a wonderful guest, and it's been a pleasure talking to you, and thank you.
Thanks, Deb.